And we are live. Welcome everybody to another Have a Chat session. We have with us again for, I believe, the second time that he's been on this show, and the third time that we've had a hangout together. Zennistrad 1, everybody.
I need to wipe my nose.
Did you like that? Did you like that little clap? Oh shit!
That should not have been that funny.
She really shouldn't have. It was really just me making a face and clapping. That's it. That's all it was.
Okay, so anyway, I heard that one of the things you wanted to talk about was that recent video that was done by Armored Skeptic in response to Steve Shives.
Yeah, so there's so many like problems that I found with that video, and you know, here's my problem. I wish I could make a video about it. The unfortunate thing is when I'm trying to like upload a video on YouTube, if I just use the direct video thing, then my camera usually cuts out between like 7 to 10 minutes into me doing anything, regardless of what I'm doing. So I can't use that. So I try to use the regular camera feature on my computer, but if I do that, then I can't read my script on the screen because it's a full screen thing. And if I minimize it, it turns off. So I try to print out my script, and then my printer doesn't work. So it's all sorts of fucked up.
Yeah, I'm glad that my laptop came with its own video recording software, though I later did buy a better recording software so I could do like better editing and stuff. Though I'm still, this is still just kind of a hobby for me, so I'm not like particularly good at editing. A lot of people pointed out that I have some sound inconsistencies.
It's better than anything I've like ever done because I don't edit at all. I never do an edited video ever. I'm like Matt in that sense. Like if you guaranteed, Edible Napalm and myself will never make a video.
I'm glad that Napalm doesn't make edited videos, because if he did edit it, then it wouldn't be, his videos just wouldn't be the same if it weren't for him saying fuck like 20 times a minute in every one of his videos.
So like fill up every single bit of dead air like fucking fuck taking little songs out of it and everything.
Okay, but what were you gonna say about that video anyway?
There's just so much that I found strange about it. So like when I told my friends that I was going to be making a video, or at the very least a script concerning it, they were like, it's the same old shit that we've gone over and over and over. But my thing isn't even so much like the truthiness, I suppose, of what he says. My thing is like, you can definitely, if you analyze his videos, Armored Skeptic's videos, just in general, if you analyze what he says when he's talking to flat earthers, if you analyze what he says when he's talking to creationists, if you analyze what he says when he's talking to any other people who are saying things that are demonstrably just insane, he makes particular kinds of arguments. He's able to explain why what's being said is wrong. He's able to explain using thought experiments. He's able to explain using evidence. He's able to explain like in ways in which he almost completely abandoned in his video he made against Steve, which just to me demonstrates like a huge bias. Like there's at least twice throughout the whole video in which he showed Steve saying something and then immediately went on to mischaracterize what was said. Like let's see.
Like I stopped being skeptic a long time ago because I don't know. He just seemed kind of, I don't really know how to describe it, but he just, some of the things that he'd said outside of his like main videos started to just raise some alarm bells. So I'm like,
like ask like the under the helmet videos or whatever the hell, and the ones where like just answering questions.
The thing that bugs me about that is though that he actually said after one of his under the helmet videos that no, he's not going to be doing any videos on feminism. Now, hey, look, I changed my mind.
Yeah. Okay, so Let me see. I'm trying to see here if like, okay. One of the things that he said, he quoted Steve Shives making an argument as to why, as to the fact that we need to at the very least pay attention to what each other are saying, because there is this notion among people who are not a part of atheism at all, who like to believe that atheists in general have a misogyny problem. And Armored Skeptic then says, well, that's kind of your fault, isn't it, Steve? Because, and then he rewinds it to Steve saying that there is a substantial portion of the atheist community that are misogynist or display misogynist tendencies. And I'm like, you have to be aware that those two sentiments are not the same thing. You have to be aware of that. It's too simple not to get. It's too simple not to understand that some people characterizing a whole population as being a thing, and people within that population trying to limit that by going after what they see as a sizable, though still minority population that do exhibit this thing. I mean, you might as well say that any Muslim that speaks out against like Islamic terrorism, it's their fault that anyone thinks that Muslims commit terrorism. That's the equivalent argument that one could make. And there's no way that he would make that argument in any other context. Like that's how silly that is. And you know, there's the other things that were just weird were arguments he makes that I've seen made before that really need to stop being made. Like the notion that there just cannot be a misogyny problem if anybody on the internet is popular and a woman. Like this.
What?
Yeah. Okay. So Steve said that the top 10 like atheist channels on YouTube have a huge misogyny like trend on them, and he like showed a list. And then Armored Skeptic just like zoomed in on the fact that Jacqueline Glenn is on that list, and he said, "Let me go ahead and block that out for you since that debunks everything that you're saying." And I'm like, how the fuck do you not understand how oppression works?
Didn't she white knight for Elliot Rodger in one of her videos?
She didn't exactly white knight for him. She just joined the bandwagon on the whole he's not a misogynist, he's just a crazy person whole thing. Which you know,
not really that much better. That's not really that much better in my opinion.
Yeah, it's really not. I like it's an attempt to derail the actual issues, which is that are the fact of the matter anyway. But yeah, Jacqueline Glenn. And he also on Twitter went on to say that his girlfriend Shoe on Head is another example as to why it's not possible that there's some sort of major problem with misogyny because she's popular. It's like, yeah, because she agrees with misogynists. Like, is that not a possibility? Like, does he think that you can't say there's an ideological bigotry in any one population if the minorities that are being oppressed by said bigotry are able to succeed in that population? Because if that's the case, then he cannot accept that, like, you know, Republicans have problems with black people.
Like, the Ben Carson defense.
Yeah, it's the Ben Carson defense. Who the hell was the other guy like 4 years ago?
I
can't even remember because he was so forgettable. But I don't know. But the fact that they are able to succeed in the Republican Party does not mean the Republican Party is not doesn't have a problem with black people. Like, and this is the case for everything. And here's the thing: I don't need to make that argument even, because later on in the video he actually makes sort of like an argument that counters that already, when he points out that, in his view, feminism, or at the very least the feminism that Steve Shives advocates, is all white men are racist and sexist. That's the feminism he sees as being advocated by Steve. Okay, well, here's the problem there. Steve himself is a white straight man. So if that's the case, then according to your earlier argument that an ideology that's bigoted cannot allow the people that they're bigoted against to represent the ideology, then that couldn't possibly be the case. So it's either one or the other. And like he says this within the course of like 8 minutes. So like he says one argument and then he says another argument that could not possibly be true at the same time. And nobody caught him out on this in the comments. Not a single person is pointing this out to him. Like, this is a logical inconsistency that I don't have to make an argument about. It's just
everyone's definition of logical is usually just thinks like me, only more so.
I mean, yeah. On the internet, you have that fucking problem. They think like me, only they're able to express it better than even I can. That makes them super total logical. Like, it's annoying to me because there's a lot of problems with this video and nobody's calling him out on them. And the thing is, the only reason I can think of as to why they wouldn't, because they have no problem correcting him on factual errors when it comes to like the age of stars, for instance. But because this has something to do with an ideology that his subscribers, or at the very least a decent amount of his subscribers, and he himself and the people who support both him and other people that he associates with, because they have an ideological bias against what he's making a video against, then they have no reason to actually correct him when he is wrong in making that video against something that they are ideologically opposed to. Like, that's the only reason I can think of as to why his video is not being like torn to shreds, quite frankly, by so-called skeptics. Because if you were a skeptic, you'd be able to see all the problems with his video, but you don't. And I don't get why. And to be fair on this, it's not like I'm some sort of like huge biased fanboy of Steve Shives either, because like later on he plays the part of one of Steve's videos beforehand where he says something like, if you want to derail the conversation by talking about men's issues, and you can go basically whine and cry with the guys over at the men's rights subreddit who cry about not being able to see their kids anymore, and the guys who can't get the girl they like to notice them. And I'm like, that's kind of a dick move, Steve. Like I acknowledge this fact. Like, you don't get to say, wah, you can't see your kids anymore, boo hoo hoo, and then also claim to give a shit about rights. Like, you can't do that. And I noticed this and I acknowledge this. So why can't anybody else acknowledge when people who are in support of people who are against Steve say wrong shit? It's not that hard to do. But ideology is so embedded, and anti-ideology and is so embedded that it's just not going to happen. And it really is anti-ideology too. It's anti-having an ideology, which is the craziest thing to say, because everything is. But what they actually are in favor of is nobody changing shit. That's what they're in favor of. And anybody who tries to change shit is wrong or an asshole. That's how it is.
That's so South Park libertarians, basically.
Basically, yeah. You can that's what I would call like everybody on the internet who's going up against any sort of social justice type. Well, I won't say any sort, because there is a validity in saying that some people have said some stupid ass shit, and some people who identify as social justice advocates who do also say some stupid ass shit that does need to be called out on. But having a blanket bias against all social justice is normally a result of just not wanting the status quo being challenged and thinking everybody's just being a bunch of whiny bitches. That's basically what it is. That's what it comes down to.
Like there was this one. I think there was a Simpsons episode. Hold on, what's that echo?
Sorry, that might be me. Hold on.
Okay, never mind. But it kind of reminds me of this one clip from The Simpsons where there's this one character who's talking about who's talking about how people of Springfield, for some reason should use their privilege to help others who are less well off than themselves. And as soon as Homer hears the word privilege, he's like, woohoo, privilege. But then as soon as he hears the rest of it, he's like, boo. And that's what it reminds me of.
I love having privilege until somebody tells me that it's a problem for other people that I have it. At which point you're a racist. As soon as my privilege becomes a problem in society, then anybody who points it out is just as sexist and racist as they claim that I am, even though I haven't said anything sexist or racist yet. But let's go ahead and just nuclear option, basically. Or make everything blow up so that I don't have to actually defend the fact that white people might actually be treated better in society. Oh my God. There was I was in a Skype call the other night where we got big into the whole like problem with black people being treated so badly in society. And we got into the history of COINTELPRO, the Black Panther movement, and recently, well, somewhat recently, I should say, it's kind of like a few months old now. But there was a cop basically who came out and went on a bunch of shows and said, "Hey, I'm just gonna let y'all know, yes, we do have a bias against investigating black people. That's what we do. I forget his name. It was Michael something like damn it. I'd have to go back and find it.
That really infuriates me about how people kind of try to respond to that sort of thing with, oh, well, black people just commit more crime. Maybe they should just stop committing crimes then. Is that they just sort of make blatant statements about crime without really bothering to elaborate on what specific crimes they are talking about. Like, for example, there was the massive report by the American Civil Liberties Union, I think it was a couple years ago, not sure, but it showed that even though black people and white people use marijuana at similar rates, black people are much, much more likely to get arrested for it. And that's a huge problem because drug arrests are a substantial part of the reason why our prisons are so overpopulated. It's the whole war on drugs thing is, it's a huge social problem, I will admit. I'm very much opposed to the prison system as it currently exists.
As it currently exists, yeah, I think, honestly, I would say that if we're going to have prisons in any way, firstly, they can't be profit-driven. That's one of the main things, because keeping it profit-driven means that we have to keep arresting people regardless of what they did wrong. I mean, when I was listening to the story of this cop that I was talking about, who came out to point out the racial bias that exists, he said, you know, he did a lot of undercover work, and what he would normally do is he would understand, after having watched somebody do like a drug deal, for instance, for like marijuana, maybe, they would then proceed to go make dinner for their family and then, help their kids with their homework and things like that. This is a life, an actual life, a person who's not actually hurting anybody, that he currently has to arrest in order to keep the prison system populated and make money for the department that he worked at, and he saw that as wrong. And I see that as like one of the main problems. Why is it that we're going after non-violent offenders and putting them away for 5, 10, 15 fucking years for not having hurt anybody?
Well, one of the things that I've heard I think there was this one race realist blog, race realist, with extra quotes. But it was this blog that tried to rationalize the higher rate of arrests for black people for marijuana possession, for selling marijuana, by saying that by citing a couple of like really small scale studies that show that black people are more likely to lie about having drugs. And I'm like, okay, so are you saying that they are more likely to be arrested because they're more likely to lie, or are you confusing cause and effect there? Because is it the case that they're more likely to lie because they know that they're more likely to get arrested if they actually say anything?
Yeah. you have to get to the beginning of the circle, because there's a circle that keeps this as a constant effect that's in motion throughout a lot of society. And when you point to one part of the circle and say that that's justified because another part of the circle, that doesn't really help you get to the bottom of why the circle is where it is in the first place. It's like if somebody says that just in general that there's a higher arrest record for Black people, and that that would be step like 3 in the circle, and then like step 5 in the circle is that they are seen as the most as the people who commit the most crimes. But we get to step 1, which is don't investigate other minorities as much as you do Black people. And then, of course, that's going to feed into the other premises that make it look like Black people commit more crimes or do other things that are related to committing crimes, because they're the ones that are more highly investigated than anybody else. It just feeds into itself. And justifying one of the later premises using another one of the premises does not get out of that problem.
You explain that a lot more articulately than I probably could have. I'm going to just admit right there. You have a way with words when speaking live that I honestly do not. I actually have to edit my videos like...
Not always. Trust me, there's plenty of times in which I'm doing nothing but stuttering and trying to gather my thoughts and just not in any way being able to articulate whatever point I'm trying to make. I mean, I'll have that happen in Skype calls and I'll end up looking like an idiot. I'll have that happen in live debates sometimes if I don't prepare. There's plenty of times in which I would be just flummoxed by the person that I'm talking to because they said something so bizarre that I just don't know what to say. Like it's something that comes with the subject that I'm talking about, really, more than it has to do with a natural flow to articulation. If it's something that I know about, then I have no problem being able to keep going on it. If it's something that I don't know about, then I'm gonna end up stuttering and not knowing what to say next.
I feel like that way. I feel like that whenever I'm talking with someone. Because recently I've been hanging out with P Zombie. You might know him as the guy who managed to simultaneously piss off virtually everyone when he was on YouTube.
Yeah.
But I've been hanging out with him, and he's a graduate student of philosophy, I think, and I'm actually very interested in some of the things that he has to say. But I will admit that whenever he starts really actually talking about some of these concepts about he specializes in ethics and meta-ethics, I believe. So whenever he starts talking about that, it's just like, whoosh. It's fascinating, but I don't understand any of it.
Honestly, it just has to do with like, I really do think that a lot of people, when they're investigating it from a formally educated standpoint, they go too far into it too quickly, and it's really easy to do because once you get past the basics, things start getting more exponentially complicated. Like that's one of the main problems with most philosophical concepts, honestly. Like that's not even just like ethics and meta-ethics, but epistemology, many different forms of logic. I mean, try and tell somebody that the laws of logic are not universal among cultures, and different logicians might actually reject the laws of logic, things that we would normally think as just givens, and a lot of it is just mind-blowing. It's non-understandable. It's uncomprehensible.
I think that I have a friend of mine on Twitter and YouTube who goes by the name Mindforge Manacles. He recently made like this really big video about the modal ontological argument for God's existence, and sort of has raised a few objections to it, as well as pointing out some of the flaws in anti-citizen X's counter argument to the modal ontological argument and why that fails. And the thing is though, is that it becomes quite clear that he has really, really heavily studied he's sort of self-taught in logic, and but he's based on what I've heard from other people who have watched his videos, other people who know about logic, he's actually very, very well versed in it. But when he has to explain certain basic concepts like that, there are actually multiple different kinds of logic, and not all of them, and some of them are mutually contradictory to each other, then that's something that just blows people's minds, because not very intuitive.
No, it's not, especially when you have everybody on freaking YouTube who thinks that they know shit saying, oh, I use reason, logic, and evidence in all of my videos. Which logic? What kind of reason? What kind of evidence? What sort of philosophy are you using in order to come to those conclusions that what you're using is actually valid logic or actually valid evidence or actually valid reasoning? Like, this is not something that you can just say blanket and have everybody be on the same page, even if they think they're on the same page. And that's it infuriates me how often that's said. It really needs to stop.
I think, like, one of the few people I've actually seen on YouTube who actually does have sort of an educated background in the sorts of philosophical issues that they are talking about is Gary Edwards, but he's also kind of struck me as being rather contrarian, because I think someone else pointed this out, but if you actually look up his profile on Phil Papers, you'll see that he's in the extreme minority of philosophers who don't believe in a priori knowledge, for example. And this means he says a lot of things that because he tends to use a lot of big words and jargon, people will take it to mean that he's right about things. But he's also saying a lot of things which are fairly controversial in his actual field.
It's not even solely that he's saying things that are fairly controversial. Like sometimes, well, a decent amount of the videos that I've seen of him actually go over like things that have not been a problem for years. It's just that they're still considered a problem, like on the internet. It's not uncommon to have, for instance, naturalism being attacked as some sort of logical positivist offshoot. And this is something that has not been the case, at least academically, for decades and decades. And yet it still happens on YouTube. And so he will make a video explaining why it's not the case. And it'll sound like he's making an argument when really all he's doing is giving a history lesson. You know what I mean? It's like that's kind of the thing, is that it's not necessarily that that all of his videos are making positive arguments really at all. It's more just him referencing what other people have said throughout time about whatever's being talked about. He will make theses.
I think it was Anarcho-Pack who said something about how he said something very strange about about a certain theory of mind, about how he said that this theory of mind was discredited when recently it has actually been brought back, kind of, because Anarcho-Pack, I think Anarcho-Pack actually does have a degree in philosophy himself. So you should definitely check out his videos. He's very, very articulate. He goes pretty in depth into the whole political theory of anarchism. And I know you're a liberal, so that might not be your thing, but I think he's definitely worth taking a look at.
Yeah, I have a lot of sympathies when it comes to anarchism and when it comes to libertarian socialism, for instance. Like I have sympathies in these aspects. My whole thing is just whether or not these things are even plausible within my lifetime. Like,
I would say no, but I'd say that but you know, it's something that I still do kind of want to strive towards. But granted, if I ever find the time to it, of course, I do actually want to do activism at some point in my life. But I'm fairly busy right now, and since I'm also looking for a job, I don't know if that will actually mesh well. Let me see if I can find the comment. Oh yeah, here it is. Anarcho-Pack, he left on a comment about a month ago. He says that it's bizarre for Gary Edwards to say that type identity has been kicked out of philosophy of mind, given that there is a recent resurgence of interest in it as a reaction to the many problems found with token identity. I don't know what any of that means, but I think he did cite some paper on it which shows that Gary Edwards basically just ignored the fact that this sort of thing that he said was discredited actually came back recently. So
yeah,
I thought
it's entirely possible. Like, I'm gonna say this theory of mind. I am way below most people on that. I can understand a little bit more than your average layman, and that's about it. Like, I can have conversations about qualia. I can have conversations about about intentional states and things like that. But as far as like the intricacies of the different theories that exist, like, don't expect me to come up with an explanation, because that's not what I studied at all.
Yeah.
That's my
yeah, but where were we going with this conversation? I think I lost.
we were just kind of like going through a bit of a stream of consciousness there for a little bit, which is fine and makes me happy, because it means that things keep going and we don't have a problem.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask you about is what kind of, you said in an earlier video that you've tried to map out a sort of meta-ethical position, and you tried to map out your meta-ethical and ethical position a bit more clearly. And that's something that I've kind of wanted to ask you about, because I haven't actually studied ethics in any serious detail, but it is something that I want to look into in my spare time if I ever get the chance for it, because I think that understanding ethics, in particularly normative ethics, is something that is vital to having a robust understanding of politics.
If I were to label what exactly my meta-ethical and normative stances are in conjunction with each other, for a lot of people it won't mean a lot. It will just kind of sound like, very much like that comment that was read about token identity and type mind philosophy, things like that. If I were to say I am a meta-ethical, naturalist, realist, virtue ethicist with sympathizations of categorical imperatives over hypothetical imperatives. Like these sort of combinations of words to a decent amount of people anyway.
I know what most of those mean, but I don't know
how they work in conjunction with each other. Like, you can understand the individual words, but when you put them all together, what does that overall entail? And while it's a decent label for people who, for like others, it doesn't really help a lot. So let me see if I can explain this in a more in-depth way that other people can understand. And let's see. Shit. You know what? I apologize ahead of time, because I am sounding like an arrogant asshole right now when I say, other people, you're not going to understand what I'm saying. No, I apologize very much for that. I mean, I should not do that. I try not to be an arrogant ass. I really do. It's just I fail at it sometimes. So here's the basic sense. So when you're talking about a realist position, you're talking about a position that there are such things as moral facts, and that moral statements themselves can be true or false, or not currently known. And that's sort of the main thing that separates it from just about anybody, or any other position. An anti-realist position, for instance, would say that whether or not the answer is true or false has no bearing as to actual trueness or falsity, but merely in reflection to intentional states, for instance, which basically means things are only true for you or true for them. They're not true for both of you, basically would be the anti-realist sense. And then there's the non-cognitivists, which would say there is no truth, only falseness. Or if you're going straight out there is no true or falseness, it's all meaningless, which people actually subscribe to.
I forgot what it's called, but I think from what I've read a little bit about this, but wasn't there some sort of like objection to non-cognitivism that was that ended up discrediting it mostly? Because I forgot what it's called.
As far as non-cognitive,
I think something had something to do with embedded. I think it's called the embedding problem. Was that it?
I'm not familiar. That's not something that I've read up on, so I'm going to have to actually look that up.
It has something to do with embedding. Like I read a little bit about it after I think Ollie from Philosophy Tube did a video on it's called the Frege-Geach problem. I think that's what it's called.
The Friedrich Nietzsche problem.
Frege Geach problem. It's French.
Nietzsche. Okay. Crap.
Okay, so basically the way it works is that it's saying that, for example, if so basically the way it works is that if you try to if you accept the non-cognitive disposition that moral statements don't express propositions, then that fails if you try to that fails if you try to say something like, if it is wrong to tell lies, then it is wrong to get someone else to tell lies, for example, because if you're embedding one moral statement in another moral statement like that, then it becomes impossible to evaluate the truth of that statement in the same way that you would normally evaluate the truth of a modus ponens. That's basically how it goes. I'm probably summarizing that really, really badly, but that is my understanding of the problem, at least based on it. And I think that's a lot of why I haven't, at least based on what I've seen so far. I'm again not really well versed in it. I'm not really well versed in this. But from what I've seen so far, you don't really see a lot of non-cognitivists these days, because that's a very, very hard problem to actually get around.
There are, okay, so as far as whether or not there are, as the predominancy of non-cognitivism, a lot of non-cognitivism, anti-realism, realism, a lot of what these things stem from in their modern day incarnations usually come from the addressing of problems that have been posed to them in the past. It's one of the great things that sort of all philosophies are based off of, in that they don't grow until objections are given to how they work in their intricacy. So my guess, and this isn't something, again, this isn't something that I have read up on as of late, but my guess would be that any sort of current non-cognitivism that exists is probably sort of a revision of past non-cognitivism in order to get past the problem itself, sort of revising it and addressing the problem to make it better.
Probably not the same thing as saying that moral statements cannot be true or false. It's probably, like you said earlier, about how they're all just false in a sense. But again, that's not.
That would be error theory specifically. In that, well, not even, no, that wouldn't even describe error theory completely, because error theory, it's not that all statements are false. It's that some are false and some we can't say are not false, but we also can't say are true because of the nature of moral statements.
Yeah, well, like moral error theory moral error theory is interesting. It kind of strikes me as it kind of strikes me as sort of like the same arguments that you might hear for agnosticism, in that it is possible that there is a God, but we don't really have any way of ever knowing that, even if we do try to argue for God's existence. So at least that's my impression of it so far. It's about arguments that try to aim for some sort of objective moral truth to a certain statement. They try, but they don't quite get there.
So let me ask you, when you hear a moral, let's go with something easy. Random person X, will go with Mary. Mary believes that not murdering is wrong. Would you say that's true, false? Would she believe something that's true? Would she be believing something that's false? Or would she be believing something that cannot be substantially said to be either? Like, that would be the question.
Say not murdering is wrong. Wouldn't that be what would be the negation of not murdering is wrong?
The negation
not
of
murdering is wrong is a negation of another statement. At least it's from at least from my understanding. But I'm wondering what exactly.
I think, to be fair, I think the direct negation to that would be that Mary does not believe that murdering is wrong.
Okay. So that is a very tough question, because I would just from an intuitive standpoint say that that's false, but I don't know if intuition would be a sufficient grounding for.
That's not a negation. I'm sorry. That wasn't a negation. It's a rephrasing that's a little more understandable.
Would the negation of not murdering is wrong be murdering is right, or murdering is permissible, or murdering is
the negation of the negation of not murdering being okay. Blah. The negation of Mary believes that not murdering is wrong is Mary believes that murdering is wrong. We don't introduce the term right when we're coming with a negation, because that presumes the consequent that's currently that discussion in the first
place. I meant to say something. I said negation, but I meant to say something else. It's I know it's like, what is
take a breath.
I'm sorry. It's just a little bit. Now I get where you were talking about earlier about being really kind of flustered on camera, because this is something I have to think back into my math class what the technical term for saying something is. For example, if you say not P is equivalent to P, not P is equivalent to not P, or something. Fuck, I have no idea. Fuck. I'm so sorry. This is
fine. It's fine. So let me see if I can do a little bit.
But like, regardless of that, but though, I would say that I would say that I would just purely from an intuitive standpoint, I would say that saying that not murdering someone is wrong would be false, but I don't really know on what grounds I would say that it's false. So,
okay. So if we're going to talk as to the idea of falsity in itself, then we have an idea at the very least as to what would not constitute falsity. So presumably you would believe that the negation to that, which would be Mary believes that murdering is wrong, would at the very least be not false, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, would you go as far as to say that that is a true thing to believe?
I suppose it's, well, the thing that's tricky about this is that one of the things that just came to mind here is that murder is not exactly a morally neutral word. It's sort of understood to be, by definition, something that is wrong. Murder is by definition understood to be the wrongful killing of someone rather than just the killing of someone. So that makes the question a little bit trickier, I think.
It's so if I were to say killing, then it would be a lot less black and white as to whether or not Mary doesn't believe the killing is wrong, because she might actually be right in that if we're going to go that far. Self-defense, right? Which is why we go with murder. Because it has a lot less ambiguity as to conceivable possible situations of rightness and wrongness and situational negations, hypothetical negations. My bad.
This is really challenging stuff. I really do need to start looking more into this.
So I'm asking you these questions, but I'm not expecting you to like really totally analyze these. Just give me what you believe from the onset, like because
I would just from the onset I would believe that saying that murdering is wrong would be true, but that's just sort of the tricky part is trying to understand why I think that's true.
Why that's the case. Yeah. So you say you would say that at least intuitionally. Murdering being wrong is a true thing to say.
Yes.
So from that, I would believe that we would say that it's reasonable to also say that do not murder is what we would put under the term of good ideas. We'll go with that. Good ideas, not goodness, but good ideas.
Sure.
That way we're not going too terribly far. Jesus. I'm sorry. Hold on. I don't know why the hell I had a phlegm in my throat. Anyway, so murder is wrong. We're going to go ahead and put under the umbrella of good ideas. And murder not being wrong, we're going to put in the umbrella of bad ideas. So good ideas, bad ideas about murder. We have these established. Now, what makes you think that murdering being wrong is a good idea or a good notion? We would have to say that this has at least something to do with how you're using the term good in and of itself. Which I would go further as to say this has to do with the definition, the operational usage of good, which would be that which is conducive to what you consider to be a moral state. Are you still with me?
Yeah, I follow mostly.
Cool. So goodness is not merely a subset of what we call morality. It's part of an equation that gets to what we would call positive in a perfectly moral state. So that's what I believe we are using when we use the term good in the sense of good ideas, good actions, good oughts, good all these things. And so conversely, since we're okay with using the term bad in when we're talking about moral propositions, then we would say that bad propositions are the opposite in the sense that they are not conducive to a good moral situation or statement or things like that, for one reason or another. It can be a wide variety of reasons. We're not going to get into them just so quickly.
Obviously not.
They could be bad reasons for a lot of reasons. They could be good and we can have good ideas for a variety of different reasons. That gets into normativity. So instead, we're just going to go based off of that the goodness and the badness at the very least exist to some extent. We don't know exactly what that extent is, but it's to an extent. But using those terms, it seems to me anyway, that we're already going straight into an idea as to what we mean when we say that something is moral. So at the very least, murder being wrong describes a situation in which you would say, based off of this, that a perfectly moral situation is occurring. So what is it about murder being wrong that matches what you consider a perfectly moral situation?
Well, Well, personally, I tend to believe that I don't know, I really don't know how to answer this, but personally, I would say that what I would value, one of the things that I value in terms of this sort of things, that I believe that people should have the freedom to decide what happens to their own lives and to their own bodies, etc. And I think that if someone kills you and if someone kills you and you have not taken any particular action that would make you responsible for that, then I would say that that's wrong, because that means that you do not have maximal control over your own fate, as it were, or whatever you want to call it.
So you give a lot of different variables as to how murder being wrong reflects what you consider an optimal moral situation. Those and a lot of those variables have to do with a lot of other very complex issues like rights. Well, I would say rights is the main thing that we're going over. So being that rights are the predominant thing that seems to be being painted here, how do we determine what rights are things which we would consider to be morally optimal and what rights we would consider to be suboptimal?
you're making me, you're asking the tough questions here.
I'm just helping you figure out what your own beliefs are. That's all I'm doing. I'm not trying to push you one way or another. I'm just trying to help us map this out.
Well, this sounds like if I were to like kind of explain this, if I were to kind of, the problem is if I were to actually kind of answer this question, I feel like this might be getting more into normativity. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what we're talking about, but
it's possible. You might place a value on normativity as being like the main factor that contributes to a optimal moral situation, right? It's possible that that's the case, that it's the main thing to take into account.
But one of the things that, based on what I have seen so far of various ethical theories, one of the things, normative ethical theories at least, I tend to lean more towards consequentialism. I think, based on what I've read so far, which admittedly is not a whole lot, I think that rule-based consequentialism is the one to go with, because I think that with act consequentialism or varieties thereof, you end up act utilitarianism.
Rule utilitarianism, you mean?
I think that yeah, because I think that with things like pure utilitarianism or act-based utilitarianism or other varieties of that, I think that you tend to get into a lot of problems with regards to whether or not rights actually exist, which admittedly is a huge problem. So from what I have read so far, which again is very little, I'm not the most educated person in this matter. I tend to lean more towards rule-based consequentialism, because I think that it reconciles, I think, the goal of maximizing the good as a consequence with the problem of rights, which I think are essential to respect to some degree. It's just, and I think that also, that based on what I've read so far, I think that this ethical approach is the one that is most compatible with my beliefs on, with my political beliefs, because I tend to lean towards anarchism, and I think it's also most compatible with my beliefs towards things like consent and rape, because I believe that people should have maximal control over what happens to their own bodies, and I think that if you kind of approach it from a standpoint where people should have to make sure that they know that the person they're engaging in a sexual act with consents to that act, then that is something that maximizes every individual's ability to make a rational choice as to what happens to their own bodies. And it's complicated. It's something that I'm putting some thought into, and I really have not come close to figuring it out. But I actually really do appreciate you asking these questions, because this is something that is making me think about this in ways that I really appreciate being able to think about, because I would have not have thought of these questions if it weren't for you asking them. I'm going to admit.
It's totally fine. I'm enjoying doing it. So let's see if we can get away from the general rights discussion in general, and moral optimism and suboptimism and goodness and badness for a second, and just we'll talk about rule utilitarianism. Why does it seem to resonate with you? You've given some explanations. So do you see any potential problems with rule utilitarianism as you see it?
Well, one of the problems I think that with rule utilitarianism, at least as I see it, is that it's difficult to make it work without it kind of breaking down into act utilitarianism if you look at it closely enough. If you ask the right questions on how these rules work and how nuanced they would have to be. So that admittedly is probably the biggest problem that I have with it so far.
And this is, I know I said I wasn't going to push towards any particular thing, but I'm just going to give my own personal thought on that matter, is that I think that rule utilitarianism anyway, being that it's potentially reducible to act utilitarianism in that manner, it suffers from a problem that I see with utilitarianism as a whole, which is mainly that if we're going to say that maximizing whatever we consider to be the well-being of people, be it the actualization of their rights or their pleasure or their happiness, or however we're going to define that, it becomes conceivable to me to point out a situation in which this becomes self-contradictory, at least to an extent, which would be I'm not sure if you've heard of the sort of objection of a monster that wants to eat people.
Oh yeah, the utility monster. I've heard of that.
Yeah.
It sounds like a Sesame Street character.
It does kind of sound like a Sesame Street character. Like, just keeps eating all the tools, all the utility tools. It just goes around. Oscar's like throwing a wrench at it. It's like, thank you. Ow.
Okay. Let's.
But the utility monster is something that I find to be a sort of a fundamental problem, not an intractable problem necessarily. I have heard a lot of different responses that can be given to it, but it does address the core of what's being talked about, regardless of the type of utilitarianism you advocate for, which is that it is conceivable that a creature would achieve more happiness through the eating of you than you could achieve in your lifetime. And if that is the case, would it not be necessarily true that maximizing happiness and well-being would be feeding yourself to said creature?
Ooh, yeah, that is a tough one. I actually do not have a response to that. At least not yet.
That's fine. It's something to think about. Again, it's not something.
I have thought about it, admittedly.
Okay. Again, it's not something that hasn't been answered. If you're not sure, there are a lot of people that you can read on that front. I can't name anybody off the top of my head, but there's always a good starting place, and that's the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Fantastic place to start for any sort of philosophical research needs.
Yeah.
But it's something to look into. I myself have a particular normative position that is still seen by a lot of people as problematic, and I understand why, of virtue ethics, which just has a basic problem of how in the ever-loving hell do we define what is virtuous and what is not. And because things that we traditionally find to be virtuous have issues within them that are hypothetical situations you can construct as to whether or not they would actually be virtuous to continue pursuing, like honesty, for instance, honesty being a virtue. There's the whole, well, what if, Anne Frank in the attic, Nazis approach your door, do you tell them the truth? Clearly, it would be considered wrong to not do so. Then again, you have the classical interpretation of the categorical imperatives in general, which is, yeah, you do it anyway, and that just shows you have a strength of character. It's like, I don't think that's sufficient for a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people are going to buy that. I'm pretty sure people aren't going to be like, yeah, selling the Jews out to the Nazis. Yeah, it sucks to do, but knowing that it sucked to do it, but doing it anyway, that just shows you're a good person. No, it really doesn't. But most responses I've heard on this front, for instance, is that perhaps it is not the case that the virtues we're talking about have been adequately defined throughout the ages, and that traditionally honesty is something as being always tell the truth is insufficiently defined in that manner. And so perhaps it's just a case that we need to investigate these words and these virtues a little bit more closely and figure out what it is about them that makes something good, and whether or not that goodness can be something that can be said to be universal if we adjust it, if we adjust what the word itself means. But these are just sort of examples.
It kind of comes to mind when you sort of put it that way, is that starts to have a little bit of overlap with other theories of other ethical theories that aren't like strictly speaking virtue ethics. Because I've heard some people argue that virtue ethics is not strictly speaking incompatible with utilitarianism or with deontology.
Yeah, and the main reason for this is because it would be seen as non-virtuous to not give a crap about people's suffering and happiness. Basically, is the main. That's the main thing. It's like if that's necessary within what you consider to be a virtue, then wouldn't you say that the virtues themselves could somewhat be said to be the rules of rule utilitarianism? And from how I understand it, it's not the case that the utilitarianism itself is what we are referring to as what is the good within virtue ethics. In that it's the actualization of the goodness of the character that is focused on, as opposed to the goodness of the for instance, consequentialism itself. Yes, we take it into account, but it's merely one part to a grand calculation, as opposed to the conclusion that we come to after the calculation.
That makes more sense.
Yeah.
The difficult thing part, I guess, is figuring out what that calculation is.
Yeah, that's and it is a main problem, which is why virtue ethics hasn't really seen a whole lot of like increasing, because that main problem of not being able to determine what we are considering the full extent of the calculation and determining what's good kind of prevents us from being able to keep going in that sense. But it does seem to me to have a strength, though, in the sense of the higher allowance for the gray area, so to speak, morally speaking. Deontology, for instance, is a lot more calculative. Utilitarianism and consequentialism as a whole is a lot more calculated. You put X variable in with Y situation, you come out with good or bad blah. Whereas with virtue ethics, it's a lot more, you can have an action that's being done, but because it's being done for particular reasons, we can say that the exact same action can be either good or bad, depending on the reason.
Yeah, that's the thing about, like, I'm in computer science, so I'm a very kind of mathematically minded guy. So that sort of thing just kind of, that whole idea just seems kind of to me, because while I do admit that there are moral gray areas, that's something that I kind of want to be able to avoid. And that's, I think, one of the strengths. I think that's why that's one of the major things that virtue ethics, I think, is less able to do.
Well, no, it can't avoid the gray areas because it fully embraces the notion that there are gray areas.
Yeah, but that's something that I think that's just not very satisfying to me, because I'm the kind of guy who likes actually being able to figure out an answer. That's basically pretty much the entirety of what I have done in terms of my actual education, is figuring out answers. So
to be fair, when we speak of gray areas, it's not that we're talking about like unsolved, irreconcilable problems.
There you go.
Within a moral statement. Sometimes gray area merely means that it's more difficult to come to that conclusion. Not that we can't, and not that the conclusion cannot be right or wrong. Let's take abortion, for instance. You got people who are on both sides, the pro-life, pro-choice, blah, blah, blah. And they have their particular reasons for it. You have a person A. We'll go with, her name is Samantha. She goes in to a clinic to get an abortion. Now, using deontology or utilitarianism, that is all that's needed to be known before we can come to the conclusion that nothing wrong has occurred here. Because we know that she went in for an abortion, that is the thing that she wanted to do, and presumably we're both of the conclusion that there's nothing within utilitarianism or deontology that would force that to be a bad thing, right?
Right.
Whereas in virtue ethics, we require more information first before we can come to a conclusion, such as why. Why is she going in for an abortion? Now, the question here might be seen as irrelevant because regardless of the answer to that question, she's still actualizing her autonomy, and actualizing your autonomy is perfectly okay to do regardless of your reasoning for doing it. Which I would argue is not the case. because your autonomy can conflict with other people's autonomy, and it can conflict, like, for instance, let's say she's doing this merely because she doesn't want, merely because in spite of the father. We'll say that. The father got her pregnant, wants to keep the kid, and she got in a fight with him and said, you know what, screw you, getting rid of the kid. Let's say that that's what's going on. In my eyes, I would see that as wrong. Regardless of the fact that she has autonomy over her body, it's being done in a way that is non-conducive to moral optimization in my mind. You know what I mean?
Well, well, the thing that kind of the immediate objection I had to that is that why would the father have the right to force her to keep her child, because you know that's I'm having trouble articulating why
I kind of get where you're coming from on this, and that's why I didn't say that they got into an argument and that is why what she's doing is wrong. What I said was she's doing it in spite of him, like specifically because he wants her to not to, but she has the right to do so, so she's going to do it merely for that reason, regardless of his feelings.
Okay, so it's she's doing it just to hurt him.
Right.
Huh. Okay, that is an interesting way of framing that problem, because that's something that does. I would still say that there's nothing wrong with her doing that, but that did admittedly give me a little bit of pause, because that does seem like kind of a dick move when I really stop to think about it.
Even if you're not going to say that that should be illegal, which honestly I wouldn't say that it's bad to the extent that it should be illegal. Even if you're not going to say that, there is still this notion, like intuitionally, that there's something off about doing it for those reasons. And if doing it for those reasons has any effect, to my mind, it seems clear to me that we're talking about that when we're talking about moral optimization, we're definitely talking about more than simply whether a rule is being followed, or whether or whether autonomy is being exercised, whether any one variable in that statement is being actualized, seems to me to be insufficient to cover the entirety of what we're talking about, if it's possible that our minds would come to a different conclusion based off of intent.
Well, to be fair, I do think that, like, in terms of utilitarianism or rule utilitarianism, I do think that if you're viewing the whole thing in terms of just one particular good to maximize, then that's going to lead to a lot of problems. I think that pluralist approach is more better, I guess, in that regard. But I do think that what you are saying is a valid objection, because it is difficult when you're asking the question of what exactly should be considered in that situation, at least.
Yeah, and it also brings to mind what I said before, is that just because a virtue ethicist might see an action as being wrong does not necessitate that a certain amount of authority needs to be reached to prevent the action from being done. Because of this fact that morality is not simply something that either can be done or cannot be done, or rather can be done, should be done, or should not be done, would be a better way to put that. Because it's more than that, we come to the understanding that morality is also just has something to do with regular social conventions. That it's possible to be doing something wrong without doing something that's necessarily evil, or it's just bad, or it's just socially wrong, in the sense of, you know, I'm going to leave a party, but I'm going to punch someone in the face before I do it, so that people know that I was here. You know, things like that. If you can come up with a situation in which you'd be able to do that totally legally, and that people would actually say that it should not be illegal for you to do that, depending on how you go about doing it.
Wait. Are you saying? Are you saying that you leave a party but punch someone in the face before you leave? How would that be solved?
Come up with a situation in which that would be legal. Like you I don't know, get in some drunk guy's face or drunk woman's face, and depending on who you are, and just start making faces, insulting them, stuff like that, and then they take a swing at you, and then you punch them. You know, self-defense.
Okay, that's how that.
It's a dick thing to do, but totally legal. That's the problem.
Yeah, so, that is the problem.
So knowing that,
you gave me pause for a second there, thinking how that could work, because
it's kind of it's interesting to me, because while we would look at that and say that's wrong, we would not say we have to make that illegal, because the problem is if you make that illegal, we come to the understanding that any act of self-defense now has the possibility of being illegal, and we can't have that, because then we can't defend ourselves. And that's something that we see as a priority.
Yeah, because you can get blamed, because then you can be blamed for having to defend yourself.
Yeah. And so we can't make that illegal, but we can still recognize it as being wrong for different reasons other than merely the outcome. And that's, or what right is being exercised. See, the right is irrelevant in this situation because we don't want the law to get involved in this situation. You know, this is kind of why I find the gray area to be a sort of necessary thing that has to be approached.
I'm sorry, but do you mind if I eat these fries? I just realized that I left them right here and they're getting cold and I'm hungry.
Go ahead. As a matter of fact, we have been going on for about an hour, 10 minutes, which is about the average size of my shows, aside from the show I did with Chris, which was like 3.5 hours long. Do you want to catch this up another time?
Sure. I don't think I've ever seen any more downvotes on one of your videos than on that one.
You should see a long ass time ago when I made a video saying that Ron Paul supporters suck.
Oh fuck!
That was about like 4 or 5 years ago, something like that.
Back when the whole Ron Paul thing was in full swing.
Yeah. Trust me.
Didn't you actually get into it? Didn't you actually pick a fight with? Wasn't there also one time where you picked a fight with Justicar?
There was a few times in which I was arguing with him, though. My like-dislike ratio on those tended to be fairly 50-50.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. He has a real knack for saying really, really dumb things and making them sound reasonable.
Yeah, he really does. Like, I still remember the video he made to me where he was trying to demonstrate that philosophers are necessarily are like modernly irrelevant to scientists merely by reading the Phil Paper survey. That's all he did. He just read out the results and said, that is why philosophers are irrelevant. And I'm like, you didn't make an argument. So I just made a video being like, what in the ever-loving hell was that?
What about the one where he made an argument about, like, I think it was a broken television? Because, like...
Yeah, it was about, like, okay, so... I was reiterating something the theoretical bullshit / Scott Clifton had said before when he was on a podcast, and that's that people who make fun of, who try to denigrate philosophy for not, quote unquote, sending us to the moon or making iPods are people who are not understanding that that's not the purpose of philosophy. And so he makes an argument and says, okay, let's say I get a television and I get a remote for that television and I'm using the remote for the television, but the remote doesn't do anything that I'm expecting it to do. So I call up some people who sold me the remote and I say, hey, this isn't working at all in the way that I expected it to. And they said, oh, it's not used for the television. It's not supposed to be used for the purpose that you expect it to be. In any reasonable situation, I would say that the remote doesn't work. And I'm like, yeah, but the problem is it starts off with the assumption that it's supposed to work on the TV when it's not. It's what's actually happening here is you're grabbing a vaporizer and you're pointing it at a TV and going, why doesn't this work? Because you don't understand how it works.
I remember that now. Oh my god, I remember.
I didn't use the vaporizer example as I was explaining this, but yeah, it was a really strange argument that he made. Yeah, but you know what's weird about that is that was at the time in which I still didn't find male circumcision to be a problem, because being a circumcised person, I'm like, I don't really give a shit. So I never read up on the issue before, or any of the actual problems with it. So that ended up being a thing that I sort of waved off in the course of those videos that I had with him, and that became the main focus, is the fact that I waved that off, and the fact that I clearly don't give a shit about people's dicks. Was the main thing, is that I like to chop off dicks, was now what we were focusing on. So he derailed that perfectly. I clearly fell into that trap. That was my problem. But yeah, I've gone up against him. I've gone up against Snake Plisskenist, or rather Rizzle Dizzle. At this point, there's a lot of people that I have had sort of fights with.
Yeah, I try not to do that more. There's one video that my last video where I kind of do that, but it's one that I've been working on for the past 6 or 7 months. So that was kind of before I decided to not do that anymore.
The What's with Rape Culture video?
Yeah, it was inspired by Chris's series "What is Wrong with Feminism" before
By the way, very well done. I'll say that. I want to point that out to you. That video was.
Thank you, absolutely. But yeah, anyway, on the next part of my video, I'm going to explain why people do not understand what we mean when we say that. I'm going to point out why people absolutely do not understand what feminists mean when they say that drunk sex is rape, because that's something that really, really annoys me. Like, I actually had someone in the comment section of that video explain to me when I pointed out that in contract law, if you are too drunk to understand the nature and consequences of the contract that you enter into with someone, then you can sue to have it voided. One of the things that he just responds with is, yeah, well, sex isn't a contract. That was it.
How is it not? How is it agreement between
you're two people who are
not a contract?
It's two people who are entering a mutual agreement into a certain action. How is that not the same thing? That's exactly. But
I've always thought that it's very strange to me that people just don't that people have such a strange idea about drunk sex and rape. Supposedly I was supposed to have a debate with Sargon about this, like,
he never got back to you.
That never ended up happening. And
I think he doesn't respond to his email.
I've responded to his email, and then I think it's possible that he sent me something and I might have gotten lost track of it or something. I'm not entirely sure. Sargon, by the way, if you watch this, get in contact with me, buddy.
Well, the only reason that my thing with him happened is that after that whole shitstorm happened and I got like harassed the fuck by a bunch of his fans, he actually personally contacted me to kind of apologize for that. That was actually one of the strangest moments of my life, when I kind of realized, wow, you say a lot of horrible things, but you're actually nice when you're not talking about politics. That's something that's always been so strange, because I have friends like that in real life. I
do too. I have the amount of people on my Facebook page that do nothing but post like, liberals are a bunch of crybaby fucktards and they're all a bunch of faggots, blah, blah, blah. But if I were to actually go talk to them in real life, they're perfectly normal like people who have no actual social problems. Like, it's so much more common than people seem to think. Normally, when you see the norm is, if you see somebody saying something extremely toxic or bad on the internet, chances are good they're actually not as bad as you think they are in real life. Chances are really good on that front.
Yeah. But geez, it's already 9:30. I do have to pack my stuff so I can leave tomorrow. I'm going to be picked up. I'm going to be Right now, I am in West Virginia, and I am going to be driving 8 hours to the Washington D.C. metropolitan area. So I'm going to make sure all my stuff is packed up. So
you're in West Virginia, and I'd never seen you do a collab video with Matt.
wait, he's in West Virginia too?
He's in Virginia. I'm pretty sure he's around there. I'm not entirely certain, but
no. Okay, it depends. Okay, no, I am in the part of. I'm actually in the city of Huntington, West Virginia, which is right next to the Ohio River. I can just drive for 20 minutes and I would be in Ohio. So odds are I'm pretty far away from him.
yeah, probably. Because he's,
I'm
as I understand it, he's probably more along the lines of the East Coast of Virginia.
Yeah,
I'm not entirely certain about that, but that's where my memory is serving.
I might actually, like, this next summer, if I'm ever in town, I might actually, if I ever get the chance, I might go. One of the things I wanted to do was I've actually wanted to go and visit Steve Shive, because I know that he lives fairly close to where I live in Maryland. And I know that he's met up with.
He's met up with a decent amount of people. The amount of people I've seen, people who are like, "By the way, here's Steve." If I drove for like 2 to 3 hours south, I would probably be able to meet Steve myself, honestly.
But anyway, the point is, though, I do have to pack up some of my stuff, so I'm ready to leave tomorrow morning. So. Thanks for having me here, and I guess I will see you around sometime.
Thanks for being here. I will see you around, and we can do this again whenever the hell you want. I don't mind having chats all the goddamn time.
All right. Talk to you later.
See ya.